I just want to welcome everybody. Thank you for taking your time, your lunch, so that we can all collectively learn together. We are so thrilled to have our external presenter, William Lyle. He's a DBA, CMA, and CFE, and is an assistant professor of accounting at Auburn University and researcher with a strong focus on education and student engagement. He earned his DBA in accounting from University of Florida, and his teaching and research interests center on behavioral accounting, fraud, and innovative approaches to accounting education. Now, he also examines learning pathways, decision aids, and professional preparation in the changing academic landscape that we are all experiencing now. So, we're really thrilled to have Bill share with us his presentation on bridging perspectives, faculty and student views aligning rigor, relevance, and relationships in 2026. And before we begin, I want to just let you guys know that our TLC team will be monitoring the chat. So if you have experiences to share, comments, or questions to pose during the Q&A at the end of our session, please use the chat as we'll be fielding those throughout. Also, for those who are interested, a certificate of completion for 1 credit of professional development is going to be provided by McGraw-Hill for your attendance in today's session. So that's a wonderful bonus for our Lunch and Learn today. To receive that certificate, you will directly email Greg Feiner at McGraw-Hill, and we're going to share his email and all of that contact information at the conclusion of our presentation and during our Q&A time together today. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and hand the virtual mic over to our external presenter, Bill Lyle. Bill, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise with us
For
today.
sure. Can you guys hear me okay? Always got to get that out of the way.
Yes,
Excellent.
coming through loud and
Um,
clear.
when you say expert, I'm always very cautious to use the word expert. It's more, I like the word perspective. We're all playing the same game. We just have a different approach. So, my goal in doing these types of sessions, especially let's just call it maybe a less formal setting where it's a lunch and learn and we're just really talking about ideas, is to make you think a little bit maybe about what you are doing or what your students are doing, and as the title slide discusses, maybe seek an alignment. I'm not going to pop on here and tell you how to run your class or what's the absolute best way of approaching any one subject that we're about to talk about, but really more again just to get the proverbial juices flowing, in the sense of re-examining where we are. So, and I told Amber earlier, I didn't follow my own advice, and I probably made a more robust PowerPoint than I have time for. So if I feel like, or if you feel like I'm moving too quickly, that's by design, because I want to get to the point where we can have some meaningful discussion about any questions you guys have or comments or experiences that maybe even differ from mine, because that's certainly okay. So as I go through, try to be fancy and build the transitional elements in my PowerPoint. And by the way, I'm not fancy, I'm not creative. So if you're a creative type, don't laugh at me. But I really wanted to start with a statistic to make myself appear like I have credibility. The problem is this is already 3 years old, so it's not 100% accurate, but I think we're still in the sphere of about 50+% of students nationally are taking at least one online course. And I know at your university, that's very common, if not exclusively online. The statistic I read for 100% online students is about 25% of the student population. So that's a big number. And I would not say that today's discussion is exclusively about online, but it certainly is a anchor to what we're talking about. So why this matters, how we build it, working with your publishers, working with your external partners. This is something I deal with every day. We need to think about it from a perspective of, that context and then start to pull in variables that really speak to us as educators. And I think the first one, and we're going to sort of go through three main variables today, is success. In the context of alignment, and you're going to see that word quite a bit. How do we define success? And more importantly, what I tried to do is view it from both a faculty and a student perspective. If you're sitting in this room, you probably were a good student. So your view of the world might be different than, the average student, whatever the word average means. And we're all faculty on some level. So we know that success can be defined differently. And we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about engagement. And engagement, because of my limited time and the fact that I'm an accounting professor and you may have zero interest in accounting, um, my goal is to just talk about engagement on a higher level. What can we do as a faculty member to be more thoughtful about engagement? And by no means am I perfect when it comes to engagement, but I know the pitfalls because I've been doing this long enough to have quite a bit of gray hair. And I think really the anchor to those first two constructs would be retention, because probably the most common theme I hear across the board in academia is retention. How do we keep our students? What is it that we do that matters? And all of that is under the context of trying to converge that alignment between faculty and student without lowering standards. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Like, what does that mean? How do we retain people without lowering our standards? And I think truthfully, it requires a lot of clarity, especially in the online space. Best practices, things that you guys are already doing, I'm sure would be helpful to the group, but we're going to sort of contextualize it from that perspective. So without showing an agenda, our three pillars today are success, engagement, and retention. And then at the end, we'll have some, cleanup duty on talking as a group. So the framework I chose to work from would be from a faculty perspective. So each of these three variables we'll talk about, what do faculty think? And since I'm a faculty member, just giving you my perspective. What do students think? And this is coming from a lot of different places. We talk to our students, we survey our students, we're evaluated by our students. And oh, by the way, all of us were students. So think about what it was like when you were a student, whether you were in person or online, you have that experience. Then we're going to talk about the misalignment. And by misalignment, we're saying, where do expectations diverge, or where can we have them converge using sort of what I would consider intentional methods? What you're doing in your courses. If it's working, tell us. If it isn't working, what can you change? And that's sort of kind of what I would like you to take from this session, knowing that, I've only got 35 minutes to talk to you. And of course, you're not going to make drastic changes. We're going to try and just peel off little layers. All right, so let me step back and I'll start talking a little too fast. So I have to tell myself to slow down. What is success? So if I just look at the top of the slide, um, I think that's a word that is very, very latent in its actual definition. By that, if you've never done qualitative research and you wonder why I'm trying to use a fancy word, well, again, I want to make myself sound smart, but we're basically talking about an unobservable phenomenon that we talk about like it's there, like, oh, success. Yeah. And A is success. Well, maybe that's not success in everyone's eyes. So what we're going to try to do is go through success from a faculty and a student perspective for that alignment. And we can think about it, and this is where we'll start to see differences of opinion of what you consider success, meaning you as a faculty member. So you could easily jump into Chat GPT or Copilot or Gemini and type in success from a faculty perspective, and it's going to spit out something that looks like this. But I think we would all say that from a faculty perspective, when we're teaching a course, we're trying to have our students achieve the learning objectives that we put forth on day one. Like, that would be success on some level. Obviously, there are varying degrees of success, but that's going to be our sort of our starting point from a faculty perspective. From a student perspective, one of the things we often hear about is students not knowing what's expected of them. So they're successful when they know what they need to do, they get a good evaluation, as in fair, and then they improve. They do the things through feedback and support. So I'll give you a non-academic example. My daughter was in cheerleading competition this weekend. That's a very subjective sport. You're basically judged like you would be in ice skating. They didn't win. They were second, thought they should win. It turns into a lot of parallels to where students might be when you're grading an assignment or giving them feedback. And the idea is, depending upon what the student was told about expectations, they may or may not feel like they received a fair evaluation. I can tell you, obviously, my daughter didn't feel like it was fair, but that's life. Sometimes you don't win, but they knew the rules of the game. And I think from a student's perspective, that's really where they want to be from a starting point. Overall, converging all of this together, it's about alignment. So I don't need to go through and read every bullet point, but that's the main theme of success is alignment between students' expectations and what we as faculty deliver. So how does this break down? And I think that's the other part of that convergence framework, which is identifying what happens. And these are anecdotal sort of thoughts that I throw into the mix. Faculty emphasize outcomes, and students don't know what to do to get to that outcome. Now that doesn't happen everywhere. I mean, obviously, most of us are really good at what we do, or at least I like to think so. But I'm sure we've all encountered a faculty member, a colleague, or even been a student in a class where you sort of kind of didn't know exactly what was expected of you. Um, and you were striving to achieve a goal that wasn't clearly defined. And I think that happens on the front end. And we'll talk about some best practices and things you can do to help yourself as a faculty member, but it's about emphasis and minimizing confusion. Now, this is a vice versa type of bullet point. So it could be that we expect independence out of our online students, for example, and they want a very structured, scaffold course to tell them exactly what to do. Or it can be the opposite. I've had students in online courses they're very intentional in telling me, like, I don't want you asking us to do a lot of discussion activities or giving us a lot of busy work because I just want to go and do my work and get my grade and move on with my life. I'm not saying that's right. I've heard that before. So just to give you an example, I tend to teach, at least at points in my career, the introductory financial accounting course, which is like the first accounting course business students take. And usually in that environment, whether it's online or in person, it's going to be very structured. Due dates are very deliberate, very intentional. You're doing X, Y, and Z on a week to week basis. Sometimes I will then follow up the next semester and teach the second accounting course, which for the non-accountants in the room is called managerial accounting. And in that course, I might tend to change the structure. And it will be the same students, and I will give them a little more independence. And I might tell them all of your assignments in module one are due on X date. And the funny thing is, usually the students like the independence better, but they perform better when there's more structure. That's just my experience. And the reason for that is they have the human nature of procrastinating, waiting till the end, trying to do all the work at once. I'm sure you've experienced that either for yourselves or for your students. So that's sort of kind of where you can see a misstep is not clearly talking about how that can affect your success. And then obviously, we know that expectations can be assumed on either end. And sometimes when we make an assumption, well, we know where that can lead us. I don't want to cuss on a recording, but you guys know that assumptions can be bad. It can make us look silly. So we don't want to be assumptive in what we think our students know. We want to be very deliberate up front. And we'll talk about that maybe even in rubrics, for an example. Um, Later today, I have a student coming to my office, and we are talking about why he is probably the best student in our program, and his first exam grade was significantly lower than his expectations. In fact, as soon as I looked at his grade, I knew he was going to email me and want to come in and talk about what happened. So there was a breakdown in his success that we need to talk about together to determine if it was something on my end. Did I not tell him the right material to study? Of course, I don't think that's the case. I'm perfect. I do, how could I have done something wrong? Or, or did he misinterpret something that was expected of him? But the good news is he's such a thoughtful young man that we'll have a good conversation and we'll figure it out. And in the long run, he'll be better for it. And so will I, because I think one of the things you learn as you get old in this profession is the more you're willing to talk to your students, especially the ones that are willing to talk to you, the more you can use their feedback to improve your process. So again, anecdotally, that's going to happen for me in about 2 hours. So how do we make this work in terms of convergence? And that's just a fancy word of saying how do we achieve some level of success? Well, you define what it looks like up front. I mean, tell your students what you expect and actually ask them the same thing if you have the opportunity. Again, with rubrics, I was building rubrics this morning. Share them before work begins. Maybe in an online course, build a video. Tell them this is what the rubric is asking of you. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not a rubric guy. But what I know is if I'm not a rubric guy, I know most of my students don't even look at them. Until when? After the assignment's complete. So if you can tell them ahead of time, like, hey, I'm going to give you an assignment and this is what's being evaluated, then they know what they need to do to perform and achieve that level of success they're expecting. As I was reviewing the slides, I was struggling to think about how to talk about showing completed work. The downside to doing this is mimicry, or that's a nice way of saying sometimes they'll copy. But you know what? That's okay. In the world of tax, we don't just throw someone into a CPA firm and tell them to do a tax return. We show them examples. We give them the ability to see what a good tax return looks like. So I think if you do that thoughtfully and intentionally, that can help with success as well. And then make sure you try to communicate that this is all achievable. Other people have done it. And accounting is always a good course because I hear so many people hate accounting. I've heard that more. Accounting's hard, accounting's math, all the normal things that we hear. We're not trying to be punitive. We're trying to make sure that you're prepared for whatever your career, whatever your next course is, whatever your career is. So ultimately, we're trying to keep our standards high, but be very good communicators of what is expected. And I think that would help with retention as well, which is the backbone of where we really are. So that's summarized a quick version of success. And again, if you're sitting there saying this dude has no idea what he's talking about, that's okay. That's just one perspective. In order to become successful, we have to be good at engagement. And I spoke with Amber 2 weeks ago, and it was very enlightening that you guys are really good at this from I think what I was able to gather, that you do this, you have best practices. So again, I'm not telling you like this is what you need to do or this is what you need not do. This is just thinking about like, how do we define engagement? I mean, if you probably said, I don't care about attendance and participation, then I would probably argue that you're not totally vested in what you're doing as a faculty member. Because of course you want your students to attend and participate. In an online environment, that looks different than a face-to-face course. I can say that I've taught many face-to-face courses where students show up and they're on their phone the whole time. And you get to a point where you want to say, look, if you're not going to pay attention, why are you even here? But we know that's not the best practice. Trying to connect, trying to get people to participate is one of our engagement expectations. Obviously, asking questions, you have to answer them timely. And then, of course, the dreaded discussion board activity. Are they useful? Are they not useful? We'll talk a little bit about that. I'm sure you guys all have various views on how discussion boards can be effective in certain courses. probably depending upon level. This is a quick one where I'm looking at it. And again, I type these up and then I think, I don't even know what the heck I actually meant here. But I think what this means is we assume that if we don't see a student, that they're not engaged. And again, we know what happens when we assume. Some of the best students are the back of the class, never say a word until it's time to get their grade. Literally, they sit there, do their work, never engage. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but we know that exists. Of course, there are other students that do that and they truly are not engaged. So it's our job to help figure out how to converge, which we'll get to. Students, just for the sake of time, I'll speed up. Students think about engagement from the perspective of how is this going to help me? How's this going to help me in my career? I hear that all the time. Is the stuff that you're teaching me actually going to be used in practice? And accounting is an easy example because it's a trade, right? Students are going to go be accountants. So it's easier to make that delineation. Are you present? Are you responsive? I mean, I have students that come to me and tell me about peers of mine that never respond to emails. And again, personally, I can't fathom having that approach, but it happens. And of course, students want to feel acknowledged. They want to feel seen. So the reality is, we know that students can be engaged without being vocal. The vocalness or the participation allows us to feel like, and again, it's all about this latent thing. We feel like they're engaged, so we encourage that participation. So we break down, and again, for the sake of time, I can't go bullet by bullet, although I'd love to. You guys want to get out of here. At least you want to eat lunch, I'm assuming. Um, Apathy is something we interpret from silence. If you're not participating, then you must not care. Again, that can be a misnomer. Um, Students interpret when we don't respond, we're disinterested. It might be that you're a department chair. It might be that you have 17 other things going on that day and you just didn't have time to respond to emails. It could be that you have family issues. So if you're going to have other things that keep you from being responsive, you want to certainly tell students what's going on to the best of your ability. I mean, you can't tell them everything, but you might say, hey, I'm going to be busy today and I'll respond to emails tomorrow. Um, and you also want to set boundaries. And I don't think that's in any way telling you something you don't already know. But if you don't tell students that you're not going to respond to emails at 4 in the morning, they think you're going to respond to emails at 4 in the morning. By the way, if you ever do respond to an email at 4 in the morning, they're going to expect you to do it again. So I would always say, tread lightly and do not be afraid to set boundaries. So some examples, and of course, for me, it's easy for me to stick with accounting and business. One of my MHA colleagues was able to share some other perspective. But for us, it would be if I post explanations without feedback on specific assignments. By the way, I do that all the time. I'm not telling you that I'm perfect, even though I'll act like I am. It's easy to say, hey, here's the answer to the problem. Go look at it. And then if you have any questions, ask me. I don't know that that's the best practice. In fact, I know it isn't. So we want to be a little more intentional about doing the right things and providing feedback. And all of the online learner type of people in my institution, people that come in and say, you're doing this wrong and you need to do this better. They all say feedback is the number one way that I can help with retention. Whether or not that's true, I don't know, but that is a big element. And we're getting to retention in a minute. How do we converge? Well, we pretty much already know the answers. I threw in some AI stuff here. By the way, I used AI to give me these responses. So it's don't blame me if you don't like it. Yell at Gemini. I think I used Gemini. I can't remember what platform I used. But hey, how do I converge engagement? I mean, if you are good with using these new tools that we know our students are going to use, and publishers are diving in very, very quickly to this space as well, you can use AI to give you discussion prompts that tie right back into your material. Again, getting that engagement because it makes sense and it ties together. Offering multiple modalities of engagement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that the engagement part is probably the easiest of the three for us to visualize because, again, you're good at it. and you do this on a daily basis. What I did do, and it's funny, I pulled this is from this semester, and I immediately found my first error. It's on the first line next to due date. I put January 20th of 2025, and we're in fact in January 20th of 2026. So right away, none of my accounting students caught it because they submitted the assignment on time. This was an engagement activity that I've started to change from the old fashioned discussion board where you just typed in a response. Best case, it's your own words. Worst case, you're copying it from ChatGPT and just throwing it in there. So this is not a discussion board. This is what I'm terming a discussion activity. And all I'm doing here is I'm making the students create a recording. They have to show their face because this is for a graduate course. They also have to be somewhat dressed up. I mean, I'm not saying shirt and tie, but they can't be wearing an AC/DC t-shirt. And they're just introducing themselves because this was at the beginning of the term. And they're also then responding to a case prompt that allows me to evaluate them not just from what they're saying, but also how they're saying it. And truth be told, one of the hottest topics in accounting from a professional level coming down to us in academia is your students need soft skills. So this type of prompt allows them to practice talking on camera, not being nervous, and knowing what may or may not be appropriate. And then you can provide feedback. And by the way, I didn't copy the whole thing. Right below this, there's a very intentional rubric that tells them exactly how to earn the 50 points. So figured you didn't need to see that. You guys have probably built and seen many, many rubrics. So my last 7 or 8 minutes, maybe a little more than that, but I'm going to try and hit the brakes around 12:35-ish to give time for discussion, is talking about retention. So I would say the number one thing if we were in face to face is I would say, how important is retention to you? And of course you would say, oh, I don't care about retention. I'm joking. You wouldn't say that. You would say, it's the most important thing because for us, that's the lifeblood of how we keep our organizations operating, right? If we don't have students, we don't have money. If we don't have money, now I sound like an accountant. It's hard to keep the doors open. So, what can we do as individuals? Well, we motivate our students and we provide a strong level of work ethic to make them feel like the experience is meaningful. For us, that might be experiential learning, push them into internships, help them find jobs. We have a very robust accounting club and we use our Beta Alpha side to help place students. It's all about what we can do in the classroom to make them feel academically prepared. I mean, the worst thing you want, in my opinion, is a student to finish a class and say, why the heck was I even in there? And again, I don't usually say heck, but I want to make sure we're clean here. So why the heck am I even here? So retention is not about just doing things to make your students happy. If that were the case, we would just hand out A's. We just say, oh, you got an A, you're good. And then students are happy and moves on. We want to make sure we're still meeting our standards and preparing our students for the profession. So sometimes I'll hear colleagues say, well, if students drop the program, they just weren't a good fit. That could be true. But that's sort of kind of insinuating that they didn't do anything wrong as part of this retention process. And I don't think that's true. I think we have to be intentional. I have colleagues that preach this literally every day. Like, we have to change if we're going to stay around because of all the external things that are happening in higher education. So again, we're not going to do this right this second, but if you said in a normal environment where we're not on Zoom and not trying to talk over each other, how important is retention to you? I would argue it better be very important. Like that's me being almost sounding like an administrator, which is not what I want to do, but it's that important. So students want to feel like they belong. They want to know based on all the engagement activities, or I'm sorry, engagement discussion we just had, the things that we do matter. And I think there's a parent parallel. Now, this is me totally just probably pulling it out of left field. Many of our students are very, very supported by their parents. Some of them are not. I understand that. But we know that a lot of our students come into the classroom and they expect to be treated in a certain way where we might be considered quasi parent, like a quasi parent. I don't literally mean that, but I mean we're trying to approach it where we want them to exceed. My daughter, the most important thing for me is for her to succeed. So I don't obviously take that approach with all of my students, not my daughter, but I like to have that mindset in understanding that that might be their expectation. So when we can think about that from a parallel perspective, I think it gives us a better mindset about what we do and how retention is tied to our actions as well. Um, that's a belief system. And I think students, if you talk to them and they were being honest with you, they want to know, what do I need to do to improve? Not just, hey, do this coursework and you'll be good. Meaningful conversations. It's almost like a relationship game. So the breakdown is, I think we already know this. If we wait and provide feedback after decisions regarding grades have already been made, well, what's the point of doing that? I mean, I'm not saying you can tell a student before a final how they're going to perform on the final. I mean, obviously, that's not what I'm saying, but you have to provide feedback. You have to make sure expectations are clear on day one, and don't misinterpret withdrawals as a lack of effort. Sometimes it is because of those other activities in a student's personal life. It could be that they have too many classes. Like, for example, we have so many students that are working internships, maybe also working a job, and they're also taking a full boat of courses. And I think sometimes that just becomes too much. Yesterday, one of my colleagues was in my office telling me that one of our students has a 40-hour a week internship. She's working also at a grocery store, which is like her regular job, and she's taking 4 classes. I don't know how you do that. Like that's just, that's crazy to me. But knowing that, we have to be supportive and give guidance and in some cases mentoring to help them understand where we fit within keeping them as a student. First exam shock leads to withdrawal. I usually get over this in most of my intro accounting courses by telling them continuously that accounting is hard. Accounting is hard. Accounting is hard. Like I'll just keep saying it. It's hard. And if you want to be an accountant, that's good because that means by the time you are at the end of the road, when you finish and you go and sit for your CPA exam, you're going to have a really good career. You're going to have a really good income and you probably can have a really good life. But it's not easy. It's not given to you. You have to basically go into it. So that the first time you get a bad grade on an exam, don't freak out and quit because we all have. I think my first accounting course grade was a C. Not proud of that, but I didn't know. I think accounting in many ways for me was like learning how to play the piano. At some point, it just clicked. And then sometimes it never clicks, unfortunately. Um, Convergence of retention and how those go together. This is probably things you're already doing, but it's good to hear. Do mid-course check-ins. Ask for a survey. Send a survey out. You guys probably have access to survey software, Qualtrics, whatever you use. And ask your students, how's it going? What do you like? What don't you like? And you're not going to change based on one student's comments. But if every student says, I really didn't like the first discussion activity because it didn't connect to anything in the course, maybe you think about revamping. Be explicit. And I think obviously I was talking to a gentleman this morning at a coffee session about, you know, think about how you can connect your real world life to what you teach. And for me, that's easy because I was in corporate finance for a long time. So, it's not hard to say, yeah, I did this before. And that may not always be the case, but try to do that to the best of your ability. Again, with a little bit of an AI spin, you can use AI to help you with early alerts. What can I say? How do I say it? I can summarize behavior. Obviously, tread lightly. You got to worry about privacy. You don't want to be dumping your students' information into an LLM, but you certainly can, use it on a more general level. And look, at the end of the day, it's a tool. I'm not saying it's a good tool, but it's a tool. So what we don't want to do, and I'm checking my time, is lower our standards. That's a big no-no. If you guys have accreditations that you have to meet, which I know you do, you have to have certain standards in place. In fact, it's evaluated every 5 years, every 10 years. People come in, they tell you what you're doing wrong. And if you're doing grade inflation, I feel like not only are you doing a disservice to your profession, but also to the student, right? You don't want to be and I think oftentimes we'll joke about this if we're not the person doing the inflating, that's why they get such good student evaluations. If you give everyone A's, your student evaluations are going to look really good. Um, so if you're an administrator, you may look at that. You don't want to reduce content. I mean, I guess what we're really saying here is don't make it easier just to retain students. I mean, if you need to make it easier because the content is a little too difficult, that's one thing. But doing it just for the sake of keeping students in place, I don't know that that's the best practice. You probably was, why the heck would he put baseball steroid example? This was to remind me that back in the 90s, there was a big scandal in baseball with guys using steroids and hitting lots of home runs. And if you like baseball, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're old like I am, you probably remember it. I'm sure none of you do. But the example I'm pulling here is because at the time, and I use this in my fraud courses all the time, at the time, it started to become if one person is doing it, as in if one institution is inflating grades and students flock to that institution because it's easier to get a high GPA, it might be real easy for us to say we have to do the same thing. Another way of giving you that analogy is if one guy is using steroids to hit home runs and another guy isn't, and remember, most baseball players, this is all they've ever done. If they don't hit home runs, they don't have a job. And they aren't going to go be a college professor because what did they do their whole life? They played baseball. The analogy is we can't simply follow the pack when we hear about other institutions doing these things in an effort to boost enrollment, because I think in the long run, it's not going to help retention. It's actually going to hurt. So you want to think about that perspective. Forget I talked about baseball steroids. I don't think it's inappropriate, but it may not make a lot of sense. But I think it'll stick, right? Like the idea of don't just follow someone doing something because you think it's going to help you in the short run. We want to be transparent. We want to have a presence and we want to have alignment. I mean, the fact that you're here today tells me that you have presence. I mean, obviously there's a carrot. Carrot's always nice, but the truth is to sit here and listen to a guy with longer hair talk for 40 minutes may not be your idea of a good Tuesday afternoon. So bringing it all together, we know what success looks like, sort of. Again, it's latent, so it depends on how you view success. We are really good at engagement, but we can always think about being more, um, I'd say, intentional with our engagement activities, and know that retention is a long-term proposition, not a short-term result. Meaning, yes, it's important to keep students in place for the next semester. Think about it long term. How does it benefit you? Even if you have to use it from a self-interest perspective. Self-interest perspective is if you like your job, you need students. So we maintain academic standards and we do so by giving students confidence and direction. My reflection is where might my expectations be implicit rather than explicit? This was me answering my own questions. In accounting, the stupidest thing I can do, and I'm saying that very bluntly, is assume everyone cares about accounting. I teach marketing students, they do not care about accounting until I show them value. They walk in the first day of class and they hate me. I mean, not literally, how could you hate me? But they do not like the idea of sitting there. I assume that my course structure is great. I've sat in many meetings where there is essentially this thing where students will say, or I'm sorry, colleagues will say, all of us think we're really good at what we do. Of course we do. That's why we're here. And then finally, pick one. I'm just wrapping up now. Pick one thing and decide um, if it would help you, how you can put it into your course structure, how you can use something from today.
All right. Well, then, with that, I just want to thank everybody so much for your time. Thank you, Bill, for sharing your insights. And if you have any additional questions, information, or just ideas that you would like to share your experiences, please feel free to reach out to TLC. And we hope to see you at our next Lunch and Learn.